Is the act a party line issue that Democrats don't favor this, Republicans do favor this, or how's that playing out?
Sure. It has bipartisan support in both the Senate and the House. I think that it is up to about 100 co-sponsors in the House. But it does have bipartisan support. It was introduced with bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate. So that's another unique factor of this legislation.
And when does it come to a decision point?
Well, that's a good question. It's pending in Congress. We certainly would like to see it move forward this year. I can't speak to, how quickly it will move through Congress and whether it will continue moving through Congress. We are barreling towards November elections, and so hard to say how elections are going to shake out and what impact that's going to have on the American Franchise Act and any legislation that's pending.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Franchise Hot Seat Podcast, where we talk about all things franchising. Now, here's your host, Dr. John P. Hayes.
Today on the Franchise Hot Seat, we're tackling one of the most consequential policy proposals in franchising, the American Franchise Act. Hi, I'm John Hayes, your host, and my guest is Sarah Davies. She's General Counsel of the International Franchise Association. Welcome back, Sarah. Appreciate you taking time to talk with me and my audience.
Thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah. So supporters of this act, including the IFA, say it's going to bring clarity and consistency to a complex state-by-state system. Critics warn that it could reshape the balance between franchisors and franchisees in ways that we don't fully understand. I'm a little fearful that the critics will come after me this time. Not that I can't handle that, but I know there are lots of hot opinions about this. So we need to take a closer look. And that's why I wanted you to come back on the Franchise Hot Seat and join me in this, Sarah. So what problem is the American Franchise Act trying to solve, and why is federal legislation the answer now?
Sure. So the goal of the American Franchise Act is to bring stability to the joint employer standard under two federal acts: the National Labor Relations Act, that's enforced by the National Labor Relations Board, and the Fair Labor Standards Act, that's enforced by the Department of Labor. So that's the goal. Everyone's familiar with the volatility that has happened for over a decade, at least with respect to the joint employer standard under the National Labor Relations Act, because that's been volleying since the Browning-Ferris decision that was issued in 2015. And so we've had this contracting and expanding of the joint employer standard from a standard that, until the Browning-Ferris standard, or Browning-Ferris decision, was based on an exercise of direct and immediate control over essential terms and conditions of employment. After Browning-Ferris, then we had an expanded standard of not only direct control, but indirect or reserved control of a more broadly defined essential terms and conditions of employment. And then since then, we've seen that standard shift several more times. What that's done in franchising is not give franchisors or franchisees any ability to predict what kind of support franchisors can provide and franchisees can expect related to the operation of the franchise business, and then what types of controls are just, off limits. So the goal of the American Franchise Act is just to bring clarity, provide a franchise-specific solution so that franchisors can provide the operational support and brand protections that they always have. And that, what's carved out from that is control over essential terms and conditions of employment. So what the American Franchise Act doesn't do is say a franchisor can never be a joint employer with its franchisee. A franchisor can be a joint employer with its franchisee, where it exercises substantial direct and immediate control over essential terms and conditions of the franchisee's employees.
So is this act principally to address the joint employer problem, or is it broader than that?
It's principally to address the volatility of the joint employer standard and the impact that it has had on franchisor-franchisee relationships. The volatility has been very disruptive to franchisor-franchisee.
Okay, and talk about that. What's the negative impact of joint employer?
Well, if you think about before Browning-Ferris, and franchisors that have been around since before 2015, remember a time where franchisors could feel comfortable doing things like providing sample employee handbooks that their franchisees could model their own employee handbooks after, use at their option. Franchisors could do things like, provide, sample job descriptions that franchisees could elect to use at their option. In addition to providing, training support, coaching support, of franchisees to help them effectively and efficiently run their businesses. All of that has been scaled back because franchisors can't be certain where the standard will sit at any given point in time. And that's really been to the detriment of franchisees who, many times bought into franchise systems, expecting that sort of support and guidance from their franchisors.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how does IFA respond to critics who are arguing that franchising has functioned effectively under state-based regulation for decades, and we don't need a national act?
Well, one, let me address the critics piece, because I want to be clear as to who the critics are. This legislation is unique because it is endorsed not only by the IFA, but also by the Council for Franchisee Associations, the American Association of Franchisees and Dealers, and the Asian American Hotel Owners Association. So this really is a franchisee and franchisor-led legislative initiative. In addition to having, IFA lawyers participate in the drafting, Mark Dady and Robert Zarco also participated in the drafting of the American Franchise Act. So this is like a unifying legislative exercise. As it relates to criticism, depending on where it's stemming, but with respect to the question as to, state versus federal, this legislation does nothing to impact any sort of state laws. There are, roughly 20 states right now that have favorable franchise joint employer standards at the state level. The American Franchise Act only applies to the National Labor Relations Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act. So it doesn't impact state laws at all.
So there won't be change at the state level where some of the laws extend beyond what the national franchise laws say. It's not going to preempt those state laws or the ability for states to regulate franchising.
It doesn't, although there's not currently, there's not franchise specific joint employer standards that are like unfavorable to franchising at the state level. What tends to happen at the state level is mischaracterization of the franchise model and the controls that are just naturally exercised as part of protecting the brand, as factors that are demonstrative of a joint employer relationship. But those typically sit in labor laws versus state franchise laws.
Okay. How about good cause? One of the issues that people have raised. How does this new act define good cause for termination? And in your view, does that favor franchisors or franchisees?
Termination of employment relationships?
Yes.
It doesn't define good cause for termination of an employee. It's truly just to establish a standard under which a franchisee and a franchisor can be held liable for violations of the underlying act. So the Fair Labor Standards Act provisions that relate to, termination, wrongful termination of employee are not impacted by the act. It just goes to the controls that are exercised by a franchisor over the franchisee's employees.
Does it impact a franchisee's renewal rights in any way?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't impact anything related to relationship laws. So the American Franchise Act doesn't overlap with any state franchise relationship laws. There's no impact to the existing landscape of the rights that franchisees currently have under any state franchise relationship laws. So all of those remain completely intact.
Okay. How about would the act change the economics of franchising, either for seasoned franchisors or for emerging brands? Are they going to notice any difference as a result of this?
I mean, our prediction is yes, because the estimated adverse impact to franchising as a result of a volatile joint employer standard is a devaluation of franchise systems and a devaluation of individual franchise brands, because it's viewed as a risk. And so when prospective buyers are looking at buying either a franchise system or individual franchise units, that volatility is seen as a risk that adversely impacts the value of the business. So bringing stability to the relationship and the joint employer standard presumably will increase the value of individual franchise businesses and franchise systems as a whole.
So I believe at the IFA convention a couple of months ago or several months ago, it was mentioned from the stage, from a general session, that this is the most important legislation that we in franchising could get behind, maybe ever in franchising. If it's that important, why is it? Why is that? Why is it so important? What's this fundamentally going to change other than joint employer? And maybe that's enough to be.
I think it's the stability that it brings to franchise relationships. I mean, when you think about the length of the contractual terms that franchisees and franchisors enter into, franchise agreement terms are typically 10, 15, 20 years in the initial term. And so when you think about the number of times the joint employer standard has shifted, even in the last decade, that volatility not only creates strain and tension and uncertainty in relationships, but like we discussed previously, there's a real adverse economic impact. And so if through passing a very narrow franchise specific solution to a volatile joint employer standard, we can restore the stability that existed before Browning-Ferris for franchisors and franchisees and allow them to focus on what they do, which is running franchise businesses, growing franchise systems. That's a win-win for everybody in franchising.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that's why it's such a pivotal moment for franchisors and franchisees.
So one of the criticisms that I have read is that this preempts stronger state laws, but I think you've already addressed that that's
right. That's not true.
No, that's not going to be the case. And then there's the one size fits all argument that this is a risk, that franchising spans several hundred industries, from restaurants, hotels, home services, B2B models. Uniform rules could reflect operational realities across sectors. Any truth to any reason for fear that one size fits all is a risk with this act?
Well, this is actually to address the one size fits all problem. And so there's been there's been an attempt to codify at the federal level a joint employer standard that was not franchise specific for several years. And it was called the Save Local Business Act. That was reintroduced and didn't advance in Congress again this year. And the problem that is, perhaps the challenge for the Save Local Business Act and advancing is that a one-size-fits-all solution for the joint employer standard doesn't work across different business models. So the goal of the American Franchise Act is to create a franchise-specific joint employer standard because of the unique nature of the model. We're not talking about, the different ways in which industries operate. This is an employment bill. It's not a franchise relationship bill. Okay. And so the narrow space where the American Franchise Act lives is there's this construct of joint employer liability that exists where, there's two companies and company A exercises, direct and immediate control over company B's employees. And that can exist in franchising and not in franchising. The important part to carve out for franchising specifically is the business model requires that a franchisor exercise some controls over the franchisee's business for uniformity, for brand protections. That element of control is built into the definition of a franchise under the franchise rule. So it's actually the opposite. It's not a one size fits all. It's a very narrow solution, because the one size fits all approach under the Save Local Business Act, didn't advance.
Yeah. Okay. Another, criticism is that this will create a litigation shift from, it'll move litigation into the federal courts. Any truth to this? Is this going to make a difference?
No, because it amends the National Labor Relations Act, and that's enforced by the National Labor Relations Board. And then it also amends the Fair Labor Standards Act, and that's enforced by the Department of Labor. So it won't have any impact on private litigation. And so those claims I don't know that we anticipate any difference either way.
Yeah. So how about Keith Miller, our friend? Has he opined on the American Franchise Act? I haven't asked him myself,
yes,
but I probably should.
Keith has been an integral part to our communications and our engagement with all of the franchisee association trades. So CFA, AFD, and AHOA. It really has been a pleasure to work on something collaboratively, and he truly led the engagement across all three of those franchisee trade associations.
That's good to hear. I hold him in high regard as I
do you. I do too.
Yeah.
Well,
I love his opinions for the most part. He's been very helpful to us at Titus Center. He has mentored groups of students for us, and sometimes I won't necessarily agree or see it as he does, but he's very reasonable. And I always like to know, where does Keith stand on this issue if there's any criticism?
I will say he's just been really an integral part to this being a unified franchisor-franchisee legislative effort. So we are, me personally and IFA are always grateful for that collaboration and the relationship we have there.
So is the act a party line issue that Democrats don't favor this, Republicans do favor this, or how's that playing out?
Sure. So it has bipartisan support in both the Senate and the House. I think that it is up to about 100 co-sponsors in the House. And so, but it does have bipartisan support. It was introduced with bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate. So that's another unique factor of this legislation.
And when does it come to a decision point?
Well, that's a good question. It's it's pending in Congress. We certainly would like to see it move forward this year. I can't speak to, how quickly it will move through Congress and whether it will continue moving through Congress. We are barreling towards November elections. And so hard to say how elections are going to shake out and what impact that's going to have on the American Franchise Act and any legislation that's pending.
Yeah. How much of your time is this act taking now?
A lot, but it's certainly the number one strategic priority for IFA. And so it is getting the attention from, I think our entire team that it deserves, given that it is, our number one priority. So we certainly would like to see it pass. And we think it'll, have real, tangible benefits to franchising on a moving forward basis.
Yeah. And what are franchisors and franchisees? What are they doing, or what are you asking them to do to help with this promotion?
Sure. We have a site called the Coalition to Save Local Businesses that has a lot of resources available for anyone interested in engaging in any of our advocacy efforts. We are, and that site has, in addition to updates and information and materials, also guidance on how to get engaged with your local lawmakers to voice support for the American Franchise Act. IFA is also always a resource. And so if franchisors or franchisees want to get involved in advocacy, we have toolkits. We have an entire advocacy team that can support whatever engagement franchisees and franchisors want to have in the legislative effort.
Great. So besides this act, I know it's taking a lot of your time, but there are other issues in franchising. And what would you say are a couple of the most important after the act? These are issues that take your time as well. What's going on in franchising these days that are captivating and taking time from you and your team?
So we are coming to the end of the state legislative session. There were, a number of franchise specific bills that were introduced this session. Some moved forward, others didn't. I think probably the ones that are getting the most visibility are the legislation that passed in Maryland that extended the limitations period for claims under Maryland's franchise and disclosure law, added an express right for franchisees to participate in independent franchisee associations, and provided some reporting requirements for the securities division related to the franchise renewal process. So IFA, along with CFA, supported that legislation in Maryland. There was also legislation that passed in Virginia, that banned the offer of a franchise, or the sale of a franchise that contains a post-term non-compete clause in the franchise agreement. So that goes into effect July 1 of this year, and that will apply to all franchise agreements executed after July 1. So I think those are the two most prominent. In addition to that, we continue to look for opportunities to collaborate with CFA and AFD and AHOA on more strategic initiatives. Certainly are looking for opportunities to work together to strengthen franchisee relationships. And so those are really the focus for 2026 thus far and for the remainder of the year.
Every September, the IFA sponsors what we used to call a fly-in, but
yes.
And that's an opportunity for people to go to Capitol Hill and speak to legislators about franchise issues. I imagine you're already underway getting plans for that. What's to look forward there for franchisors and franchisees who want to join IFA in this annual event?
Yes, we are. Registration is open, and it is mid-September. It's my favorite IFA event because, it is heavily attended by franchisees. And it is just such a special opportunity for me, to take groups of franchisees up to the Hill and we schedule meetings all day with, members of the House and the Senate that are, in their respective states. And it's an opportunity for franchisees to tell their story about what it means to them to be business owners and entrepreneurs. And it is just a really empowering thing to watch. Cause everyone's a little nervous when we start the day, and cause it's, the Hill can be intimidating and you go in and there's heavy security and it seems like, members of Congress are scary and a big deal. But man, after the first meeting, franchisees are just so confident and they walk in and, talk about their businesses and how they've built it from the ground up, and how they're, pillars of their communities and how they engage. And it's so cool. So I highly recommend it. Again, it's by far my favorite all year.
Yeah. Well, I've participated in many, many occasions through the years. It's always exciting. It always hits me that these members of Congress are like the general public. They really don't know anything about franchising.
I know.
Oftentimes that's the case, and it's a little scary. Now, there are some who are really in tune, who have gotten good at it through the years, but most members don't know what a franchise really is or why someone would buy one or not buy one. So this is a great educational opportunity for people. But what also struck me was how many times the representative would not come to the meeting and send some lower level staff member who was told 5 minutes before the meeting, hey, go talk to these franchise people. I'm not sure what it's about. And they often don't share much enthusiasm, and they don't know. They're not prepared for it. So that always strikes me as a curious thing as well, when the representative's office isn't attuned enough to realize I need to be schooled on this powerful economic movement called franchising that we know about, but most people don't.
So two thoughts. One, and I agree, I'm empathetic to what it may feel like, as a participant.
Yeah.
I will say now that I am 3 hours immersed in, IFA, and I have these really tremendous colleagues in government relations, and I learn from them every single day.
Yeah.
But you realize that it truly is the staff that are the ones that are the puppet masters and directing where legislation goes, the education component. And so while it's great to have a member there, it's equally valuable to talk to the staffers. And while they are maybe not the most enthusiastic in the interaction, they do take great notes. They do follow up with us. We send briefs ahead of time. And it's really impressive, the follow up that we get from the conversations that they've had. And those meetings, the conversations with franchisees, often lead to things like asking us to provide, franchisees to come and testify at congressional hearings. So that's kind of the ancillary benefit there.
Yeah, that's great.
The other piece that we're doing to help educate both lawmakers and the public is we launched last year a campaign called Franchising Means Local. And if you go to the Coalition to Save Local Businesses website, we have a lot of videos, and they are videos capturing what I like to call franchisees in the wild. And it is the franchise owner in their business talking about what it means to be a business owner, And I think those videos are so powerful. And so if you have listeners that are franchisees that want to like participate in the Franchise Means Global campaign, certainly have them reach out to IFA, because we are always looking for those stories to tell.
Great. And I have noticed when we've gone to the Hill and we had maybe a reluctant or a surprise staffer be assigned to our meeting, the excitement that staffer has for franchising at the end of about 20 or 30 minutes, because they have no idea. You know, someday they're probably going to leave the Hill and they want to do something. They'd like to own a business. They don't know how. And suddenly we bring in examples of what they can do. So that's been fun to watch. Say, wow, we got a new convert to franchising, somebody who's really going to do us some good as well.
Yeah, no, it's true. And it's, I think it's always very educational and enlightening for people to hear about all of the various industries in which franchise businesses operate, because I think there's this narrow view of franchising as restaurants and hotels, and you don't really think about, you know, the myriad of industries that you can go into and be a franchisee. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, I look forward to September when that event occurs. I like having Titus Center represented there as well. And we'll keep watching of what goes on with the American Franchise Act and hope for the best. Maybe it comes to fruition this year.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I
Thank you,
appreciate
Sarah.
it. Of course.
Thanks for tuning in to the Franchise Hot Seat Podcast with Dr. John P. Hayes. Tune in next time for more conversation around all things franchising.